In the ancient world, before gods were dethroned and empires crumbled, one truth haunted every civilization. Illness was not just suffering, it was punishment, a curse, a mystery that devoured the body while terrifying the soul. From the swamps of the Nile to the crowded streets of Athens, from the temples of Babylon to the mountain valleys of China, disease lurked like an invisible predator. There were no microscopes, no medicine, no concept of germs, only fevered bodies, desperate prayers, and strange rituals. The people of these civilizations turned to their gods, to their stars, to their herbs and magic, but none could truly protect them. You could be a slave in the fields, or a priest in white linen, a Roman senator, or a Persian soldier. The invisible enemy spared no one. And when it came, it did not just weaken, it disfigured. It drove mad. It erased names from stone tablets. The ancients did not view sickness the way we do. They believed illness had intent, that it was the will of divine forces, or the result of ancestral sins. Treatments ranged from animal sacrifice to the application of mercury, and when nothing worked, they accepted death with a kind of ritual grace. But not all diseases were the same. Some were manageable, others were pure nightmare fuel. So today we go back in time, long before penicillin, before hygiene, before reason, to uncover 7 of the most gruesome diseases that plagued the ancient world, and the horrifying, often bizarre ways people tried to cure them. This is Primordia, and the countdown begins now. The curse of silence, diphtheria in the ancient world. Imagine waking up in a small clay hut somewhere along the banks of the Euphrates. Your throat aches. Not the kind of ache that fades with water or rest. This is different. You try to speak, but your voice cracks, then vanishes. Soon, your breath feels like it's being stolen. By nightfall, a thick gray film has formed in your throat, sealing it shut like a tomb. In ancient Mesopotamia and parts of the Near East, this terrifying condition would come without warning, often killing within days. Though they didn't call it diphtheria, the modern term wouldn't exist for thousands of years, the ancients knew it by its effect: the sudden silencing of a person's voice, the swelling neck, the slow suffocation. They called it the whispering death. Scribes described it as the voice being taken by demons, or the lungs being cursed by the wind. Children were especially vulnerable, and entire families would vanish in days, with neighbors believing a curse had been placed on their home. Priests would chant over the afflicted, placing amulets around their necks, while healers attempted to open the throat using bronze tools dipped in honey or wine. Others smeared the neck with sulfur or ash, believing it would draw the evil out. But nothing worked. The death was slow, panicked, and almost always final. Because it attacked the very thing that defined human presence, breath and speech, diphtheria became more than just a sickness. It was viewed as a divine judgment, a spiritual muting, where the gods denied a person's right to be heard. And as terrifying as it was just the beginning, because while diphtheria took your voice, the next disease on our list took your mind. Fire from the gods, ergotism in the ancient world. Deep in the highlands of early Anatolia and the river valleys of ancient Gaul, the grain harvest was a matter of survival. But sometimes the very bread meant to sustain life became a vessel for agony and madness. Ergotism, though unnamed at the time, was the result of eating rye or barley tainted with a toxic fungus. When the grains were stored in damp granaries or clay pots too close to riverbanks, the fungus thrived. The result? Bread that brought hallucinations, burning pain, and death. To ancient minds, the symptoms made no earthly sense. Victims writhed with convulsions, screaming of fire under their skin. Fingers blackened and broke off, feet turned to rot. People saw visions of gods, monsters, and death walking through the fields. Villagers believed the afflicted were possessed, cursed by the gods for sins unknown, or worse, touched by the wrath of underworld spirits. In Proto-Celtic regions, sufferers were sometimes tied to trees, left for days in the belief that the spirits would drain the evil from them. In early Anatolia, clay tablets describe offerings of goats, honey, and even hair to appease agricultural deities blamed for the cursed harvest. Shamans tried smoke rituals, burning medicinal herbs and chanting through the night. Despite all this, there were times when famine left no choice. Some communities knowingly ate the suspect grain, preferring madness over starvation. The resulting outbreaks tore through entire villages, sometimes affecting hundreds. Modern historians suspect that many episodes once recorded as divine frenzies or dances of the forest in ancient texts were likely mass ergot poisonings. Some scholars even connect ancient accounts of fire spirits and self-mutilation rituals to the effects of this silent contaminant. And if eating bread could do this, what kind of horrors waited in water? Curse in the blood, tuberculosis in ancient Rome. It began with a cough, dry at first. Then came the blood, bright, alarming, unstoppable. In the streets of ancient Rome, it was called the consumption, for it seemed to consume the body from the inside out. But to many, it was not just a disease. It was a curse in the blood, an ancestral punishment passed through generations. Tuberculosis, or a form of it, haunted Roman society. Writers like Celsus and Galen documented patients wasting away, pale and thin, with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. The sickness had a slow grip. Victims often lived for months or even years, their lungs filling with fluid, their breath shortening with each passing day. It was terrifying not for how fast it killed, but for how long it lingered. The Roman poor, living in crowded insulae with no windows and no airflow, were easy prey. But the elite weren't safe either. In the Senate halls and marble villas, the sound of coughing became a grim soundtrack of decline. Physicians believed the illness was caused by an imbalance of bodily humors, particularly an excess of black bile. Treatment? Bloodletting, steam baths, or inhaling heated resins. Wealthy families often sent their sick to the countryside, believing clean air and goat milk could offer salvation. Others visited temples of Aesculapius, the god of healing, offering coins, prayers, or sometimes even live animals to be sacrificed in exchange for divine mercy. But beneath all these attempts was fear, the fear of slow disappearance. Bones weakened, spines curved, voices faded. Some victims came to believe they were being eaten by spirits from within. They were buried with iron amulets or garlic to bind the soul and prevent it from being dragged into the underworld. In Rome, death was everywhere, in the arenas, on the battlefield, and silently, in the lungs of its people. But if tuberculosis devoured slowly, the next disease struck in an instant. Burning the breath, anthrax in ancient China. In the misty farmlands of ancient China, sickness was often seen as a disruption in the harmony between heaven and earth, a spiritual imbalance rather than a biological one. But there was one affliction that came so suddenly, so violently, it left no time for balance, no time for prayer. The locals called it fire breath sickness. Today, we know it as anthrax. Anthrax thrived in the soil and on the hides of livestock. For peasants and herders along the Yellow River Basin, contact with infected animals was inevitable. Boils would appear overnight. The skin would darken, blister, and split open, as if scorched from within. Some victims died in hours, others in days, always in agony. The disease was believed to be caused by angry earth spirits, awakened by disturbing sacred land or burying the dead improperly. In Han Dynasty texts, these cases were described as heaven's punishment for careless offerings. Desperate to stop the spread, villagers burned entire herds of cattle alive. Entire families fled ancestral lands, abandoning homes and graves alike. Local shamans would light ritual fires on hilltops and throw in ox bones and dried herbs while chanting to appease the spirits of the soil. In severe cases, masks made of tiger skin were worn to frighten away the unseen demons. More scientific approaches of the time involved boiling herbs like huanglian and mugwort, mixed into a bitter tea that was said to cool the fire in the blood. But even when the external wounds faded, the sickness often returned, this time through the lungs. Inhaled anthrax caused swift respiratory collapse. No screams, just silence, followed by death. Ancient Chinese doctors began to classify such illnesses not only as medical threats, but signs of dynastic decay, warnings from the heavens that rulers had lost the mandate. When even the breath turned to fire, they asked, what had the empire done to deserve such wrath? But while anthrax burned the body, the next disease on our journey gnawed away at the very identity of its victims, limb by limb. The living death, leprosy in the ancient world. It did not kill swiftly, it didn't bring fever, bleeding, or convulsions, but it took the face, the hands, the voice, the presence, and left behind something unrecognizable. To the ancients, it was not a disease, it was a living curse, a slow unmaking of the human body. This was leprosy. In ancient India, Egypt, and even early Hebrew texts, leprosy was not only feared, but seen as spiritual contamination. It was believed to be the mark of divine disapproval, a punishment for hidden sins or ancestral transgressions. The afflicted were seen as walking reminders of divine wrath, not yet dead, but not quite alive either. The disease begins subtly, small nodules on the skin, pale spots, a numb finger. But as time passed, the nerves died. Victims could burn, cut, or crush their limbs without feeling it. Wounds festered, the flesh decayed, cartilage collapsed, noses sank into the face, fingers shortened, and toes vanished. Some were left faceless, voiceless, and cast out. In ancient Egypt, lepers were banished beyond the city walls and forced to wear bells to signal their presence. In the Vedic texts of India, purification rituals were prescribed, involving mud baths, fasting, and prayers to gods like Rudra or Varuna. But healing rarely came. In Judea, Mosaic law required the infected to shout "unclean" when others approached. They lived in stone huts or caves, far from society, relying on scraps and pity. And yet many of them did not despair. Because while the body decayed, some believed the soul was being cleansed. In certain temples, lepers were treated not with fear, but reverence, seen as living martyrs whose suffering brought them closer to the divine. They would be fed, bathed, and prayed over, not as outcasts, but as intercessors between humanity and the gods. Still, the fear remained. A touch, a breath, even a shared cloth could invite the curse. And if leprosy dissolved your body piece by piece, the next affliction didn't wait. It struck the young, the strong, and the unprepared, with sweat and terror. The Crimson Storm, the sweating sickness in the ancient age. It came with no warning. One moment a man was laughing in the agora or walking through the temple courtyard. The next he was hunched over, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, dead before the sun could set. In the ancient world, this terrifying affliction was known by many names, but its memory lived on as a storm within the flesh. Though often associated with medieval England, accounts of a nearly identical illness exist in older Persian records and Greco-Roman annals. The Persians called it the Red Breath. In Hellenistic texts, it was the fever of Ares, said to strike down warriors more swiftly than any blade. Its symptoms were as brutal as they were sudden: a high fever, blinding headaches, muscle collapse, vomiting, and worst of all, an uncontrollable drenching sweat that smelled of iron and decay. Victims often died within hours. Some never even made it to a physician or temple. Unlike other illnesses, the Crimson Storm seemed to favor the young and strong, soldiers, athletes, nobles. Entire barracks fell silent in a single night. In ancient Sparta, warriors struck down by the sweat were believed to have been rejected by the gods of war. They were buried quickly, without ceremony, their deaths considered shameful. Priests in Delphi blamed the sickness on the violation of sacred sites or the breaking of oaths. Desperate communities offered gold, livestock, even children at altars, hoping to halt the invisible tide. In Babylon, sick men were laid on burning stone slabs in a ritual meant to boil away the demon. Many never rose again. Foreigners and elders often seemed immune, leading to rumors of poison, witchcraft, or divine favor. As cities emptied and temples overflowed with the dead, one message spread through the ancient world: no strength could save you. But while the crimson storm moved like a wildfire, our final disease, the most horrifying of them all, didn't burn, blister, or even bleed. Instead, it crept into the mind, and once it entered, you were no longer you. Madness of the moon, rabies in the ancient world. They said the bite came under moonlight, that the victim heard whispers in the wind and felt the blood boiling under their skin. And then, the transformation began. Rabies, though unnamed in the ancient world, was one of the most feared afflictions, not because it killed, but because it unmade. It turned man into beast. It blurred the line between human and wild. In Mesopotamia, it was called the moon curse. The Akkadians believed it entered through wounds and awakened during the night. Victims would tremble, foam at the mouth, scream at shadows. They feared water, flinched at light, and clawed at their own flesh. In ancient Egypt, rabid dogs were sacrificed and buried far from villages to keep the curse from spreading. The Greeks saw the disease as divine possession, Lesa, the goddess of rage, sent to punish prideful men. The progression was horrifying. Within days of being bitten, the infected would become paranoid, violent, and eventually unable to swallow. Hydrophobia, the terror of water, was seen as a spiritual rejection of purity. Priests would chant by the riverside, begging the Nile or the Tigris to forgive the afflicted. Some victims were tied to stone altars. Others were drowned in sacred springs to purify the soul. What made rabies unique was the delay. Weeks, sometimes months between bite and madness. That uncertainty haunted ancient minds. A traveler bitten by a jackal could seem fine for weeks, then collapse in a frenzy during a harvest festival or in the middle of a crowded market. There was no escape, no cure. Once symptoms appeared, the end was certain and grotesque. And yet some believed the madness revealed truth, that in their final days the bitten saw beyond the veil into realms where gods walked and shadows whispered secrets never meant for mortals. Or perhaps it was just the brain breaking down. Whatever it was, it left a mark, on bodies, on stories, on the very myths of civilization. In the ancient world, illness was more than biology. It was mythology, judgment, mystery, and fear. Disease shaped civilizations, ended empires, and carved new beliefs into stone. But for the people who lived through it, the farmers, the soldiers, the healers, the mothers, it was daily life. Suffering wasn't exceptional, it was expected. They did not have microscopes or medicine. They had incense, chants, roots, gods, and when those failed, they had acceptance. A young woman coughing blood in a Roman tenement believed her soul was being tested. A boy foaming at the mouth in a Babylonian market was seen as a messenger of divine rage. These weren't just patients. They were players in a cosmic drama. And yet, for all its horrors, the ancient world also offered resilience. Communities came together to care for the afflicted. Prayers were whispered over fevers. Sacrifices were made, not just of animals, but of time, love, and comfort. In temples, on battlefields, even in isolation, there was always someone trying to heal, even when healing seemed impossible. Today we live in an age of vaccines, antibiotics, and sterile hospitals. We wash our hands, we name our diseases, we understand germs, but somewhere in the depths of that knowledge, we've forgotten how raw and terrifying the world once was. So the next time you feel a scratch in your throat or a cough in your chest, take a moment to remember. There was a time when that meant something else entirely. A curse, a warning, a shadow from the gods. You've been watching Primordia, where the dead still speak and the past still bleeds. Stay curious and stay alive.